Hi, everybody, and thank you for coming this morning. So today we're going to talk about adaptable plants for changing conditions, and we'll jump right in. It's 10 o'clock or 1 minute to 10, so we'll get started. Okay. So as I'd like to tell everybody who's a gardener, and I'm sure you've heard this before, we are the citizen scientists. We're the first observers often of change in our environment and definitely in our own gardens. And as gardeners and garden club members, we like to share information with each other. So we witness things, we observe things, and we share. We observe when the sun comes and goes in our garden, where it comes and goes. We want to know where to site our beds and how much light exposure. So we notice the coming and going of the solar cycles. We watch the calendars. If you're like me, you notice when it's good to plant, and it's changed over the years since I started gardening. And we also watch the weather, when to water, when not to water, frost notices. And then we notice what visits our garden. And when I say visit, that's actually not the right word. Who lives in our garden. We plant the garden for us, but it is actually habitat for everything we notice flitting and crawling through it. So what do we see? Well, I notice as a vegetable gardener that I sow later. I no longer sow on Mother's Day, as used to be the old timing gauge was put your plants in on Mother's Day. And unless it's peas, I usually wait until Memorial Day now because we've had Mother's Day frosts. And I'm reaping later. I now put my garden to bed, a vegetable garden, way into October. Rainy seasons are monsoons. Snowy seasons are, well, it's hard to say that now on a day when it's actually snowing right now and we're getting a good old fashioned Northeast winter. But the snowy seasons have been trending warmer. The wind is stronger. It's the thing I notice the most is that it's always windy. Storms are harsher. Some years less bees and more pests, and a lot more drought. So it's a strange dichotomy of monsoons and droughts. That's what we're trying to garden in. And what is it exactly we expect these plants to adapt to? It's tough, right? It's almost the irony of this talk is gardening and finding plants for unpredictable weather. And as we know, things change over time. Sometimes what we think is good for the garden in this year, we might learn in a couple more years that that's not what we should do. We should do this, or this pest doesn't come around as much, but this pest is new. So some of the things we are struggling with as gardeners are wet conditions, dry conditions, warmer winters, pestilence. How do we adapt to the unpredictable? And what do we expect plants to do in this unpredictable scenario that we find ourselves in as gardeners? So I'm going to go rogue a little bit on this talk, and I'm probably going to lean heavier into adaptable practices. We want adaptable plants, and plants can be strong and they can be adaptable, but it is also up to us to be adaptable to these conditions as well. So we choose these plants because of their beauty. They enhance our property values. They are also investments in our environment. Planting a native garden, a pollinator garden, is as much of an investment for the environment as it is for our yards. And I think that we have to lean more into native plants. While this talk might not have specifically been on native plants, when you talk about adaptability, that's really what we talk about, are natives, the plants that should do well here and are more adapted to do well here. So we're going to lean into this, but I want you to point out to everybody, a native plant is tough. Any plant can be tough if it's the right plant in the right place, but they are not indestructible. So everybody needs support sometimes, and we're going to talk about that. So plant communities. We are part of the plant community. We are the ones who invite these plants into our space, and we're a critical part of sustainability. So a plant's ability is often tied to how we interact within a community of plants and pollinators and the soil microbiome and wildlife. And within this community, sometimes we're the most likely to go rogue and cause the stresses that make plants fail. Now we talk about naturalistic versus natural. The truth is there isn't much natural about our suburban landscapes. And when we talk about new plantings and we're introducing a new garden bed into our landscape, it's our role as part of this community to welcome them into a hospitable environment. And we will talk about some tough plants, but it's important not to assume that a plant is going to survive in any soil or circumstance just because it's native to the region and considered adaptable. When you have an established bed, that's for a new bed, but when you have an established bed and an existing garden, and you've created a favorable environment, and now changing weather patterns are taking their toll, before you just decide that the plant is fail, it may be beneficial to change how some of your gardening practices are. Sometimes the things we didn't have to do before, we might have to do now. Also be aware that plants respond to stress just like people do. So before you assume that a plant has failed, it may be in survival mode and exhibiting maybe characteristics that make it look like it's failing, but it's actually protecting itself. So let's start with adaptable practices. And let's assume you've just decided to put in a new garden and you're going to go and get a pollinator garden. You're going to reduce your lawn. There's going to be butterflies and bees, and it's going to be low maintenance. You've chosen to use native plants because they guarantee their adaptability, and because that's what natives do. So now we're going to go into gardening in this space. Is this virgin territory? This is a lawn, and it doesn't look, it looks like a blank slate, welcoming, waiting for someone to come and plant something. But in reality, our lawns are some of the most disturbed and stressed landscapes. We don't know what was there before we came in and decided to put this garden. In my yard here in the Northeast, my yard used to be part of a farm. I constantly dig up old horseshoes because it was the horse stables in my backyard. I live in Westchester, so I'm constantly gardening around rocks and roots. And when I put plants in, I keep thinking, why did this plant not do well? Well, while the lawn might look inviting and like a blank slate to us, they're not particularly welcoming to wildlife, and that includes new plantings. So I've asked landscapers and horticulturalists, what is the best way to get a new garden started? It's a native plant. Why can't I just turn over some dirt and stick a plant in? And the consensus is always to amend and prep. And I will admit, as a new native gardener, I thought that the whole point of planting natives was that I didn't have to do that. I could just stick it in the dirt and it's supposed to do well. Well, I've lost a lot of plants, and I've come to learn that this is not native territory. My soil has long since gone from native. It is now disturbed, it's stressed, it's compacted soil. The microbiome beneath the grass level has been disturbed. So I need to amend and prep. So when we talk about adaptable plants that can withstand our extreme weather, just like human beings, we do better under stress when we have a healthy base. When we start off in good health, then when stress and disease and pests come, we can respond better to protecting ourselves. It's the same way with plants. If you want them to do well, start out with a healthy plant, plant it in a welcoming, healthy environment, and then you give your new community members a firm foundation to build resilience and adaptability. Resilience begins beneath the surface. One of my favorite classes, one of my favorite things to talk about is soil. I won't kill you with that now, but soil science is really so amazing. The community that exists above grass and above soil line, above the dirt, is beautiful and it has its own community members and visitors, and we love it. But what goes on beneath the soil is actually just as interesting. So we add organic matter. This was a stretch of land just before the top picture here. This was before planting, and it was long, stretched out bed. What happened is the grass was cleared away. Organic matter, compost, was brought in to break up the soil and allow the roots to ease in. Then the planting method, if you notice here, this is a small tree being planted, but it's a small tree at full size. It's actually a pretty big tree that's being planted. But notice the size of the hole for the root ball, and the soil around it has been amended. Well composted soil allows water to percolate through layers of soil. So that's another thing that helps when heavy rains come. If your soil is ready to receive water, if it can percolate through the different layers, you're less likely to get flooding. Roots and trees are really what keep us from getting getting bad floods. I had a friend who had a neighbor who put in solar panels. Great idea, really trying to be sustainable. But in doing so, the neighbor cleared trees from the yard in order to get the solar panels. And what happened was, once all the trees were cleared, now they have flooding problems. So start off with, a healthy soil, plant properly, and plant diversely, and you will find that the soil is healthier, your trees are healthier, and already you're starting to plant against flooding rains. So now that you've planted, please keep in mind all living things need water. Putting something in the ground and assuming it's native, it'll figure it out. When establishing new beds, you have to water them, and it is not a waste. It is an investment in the investment you just made. Water your gardens, water them well, and keep that in mind until they have established. I put in a new garden just recently, and it was towards the end of the year and end of the fall where we had that long drought. I had to keep the sprinklers on way longer than I usually do, but I had made an investment in this garden, and I wasn't going to let it just wither up and die because everything I planted was native and should last. I knew that my part in this community to establish adaptability was to provide enough water for my plants to establish and do well, and with the hope that as it does establish, it won't need as much water and rain will be enough for it. But the only plant that doesn't need water is a silk one. So even with your established beds, don't forsake the watering in drought. The plants will be stressed. They may recover, but they will be stressed. So do water, and don't assume that a native plant doesn't need it. Now, plant diversity leads to adaptability. Many of you may recognize this picture. It's from the Native Plant Center down at the New York Botanical Garden. And this was in the garden's early stages. So you've prepped, you've amended, you've planned your watering schedule. Always remember, right plant, right place. Especially when we're talking about adaptability, that just is that's just the way to keep a garden healthy, is putting the right plant in the right place. It just keeping plants together that have similar needs. That just never gets old. That is part of proper planting techniques that will lead to sustainability and adaptability in your garden. And a variety of plants is not just aesthetically pleasing, and it's not just the right plant, the right place, but it also builds soil health below the ground. The roots, the insects, the beneficial microorganisms form communities too, as we talked about when we had the soil slide. Biodiversity builds good soil, which will minimize the need for fertilization in the future. And also, back to our role as citizen scientists, observe which plants do well. When you have a large, diverse community of plants, when a plant fails or goes dormant, there's always somebody who'll jump in to take the space. So don't assume that, planting if a plant fails, if you planted something and you have a hole in your garden, it's not necessarily the plant has failed. Sometimes a plant will go dormant as a survival technique, and it is waiting for more favorable conditions before it will reemerge. You also may find something that naturally occurs in your seed bank. In my experience, I put in a shade garden and I put in some beautiful natives, and who joined the party and now has taken up the space where other plants have gone away is the wood poppy. And it's beautiful and it spreads. A sensitive fern is another one that just comes in. It waits for a favorable condition. I didn't plant it, but it was an opportunity, but I created an opportunity for something that was strong, wanted to be there, and was native to just occur. And it probably had been in that seed bank forever, but the conditions were finally favorable enough for it to pop up. And it popped up, the wood poppy and the sensitive fern popped up when I think I had put in a non-native columbine that failed. And in the place where the columbine left holes, the wood poppies and the sensitive ferns popped in. So a plant may disappear because the conditions aren't favorable. It may disappear because it's unhappy where it is, and that's okay. But wait to see what a plant failure leads to. It might lead to an opportunity. Now, this was an established bed of ostrich ferns, and it always did well. And if you guys have gardened with most ferns, and ostrich fern in particular, this guy's tough. I mean, you can do almost anything to it, and this plant is a tough plant. So, as are many of the natives, they are tough plants. They have evolved in this zone until the zone starts doing crazy things. And that's the point of the talk. We can't always know what's going to happen with these weather conditions. So here's where we get a little give and take on the adaptability. What can we do? What is the plant doing? So a drought hit. This was, I think, 2 summers ago when we had that bad July drought. I was away. I came home to find this scorched earth, and it was kind of upsetting. This was a really tough patch of ferns that I had just given run along the one side of my house. I just let them go, and I thought it was beautiful. To come home and find all of this was kind of disheartening. But what I learned, because when I left, most of my gardens were established. I turned the sprinklers off because I figured they didn't need them. They were doing just fine. I didn't know a drought was coming. The drought came. This plant responded by going dormant. It just, it shut down. Now, it's a tough plant, and it did come back the following season. But if I had been home and watching this, I would have put the sprinklers on to not stress the plant. I could have gotten involved and just turned my sprinklers on, given the plant the water it needed. So keep in mind, even established beds with tough plants will need support under certain conditions. It is okay to water, and it's okay to turn a sprinkler on if you have a sprinkler system, or drag a hose out there and put a sprinkler on when you know the conditions are stressing your garden. If you don't mind the scorched earth look, well, then I'm sure the plants will recover. But when we can intervene and we can help, it's important to build adaptability and resilience. This is something that's just, I don't know, I never saw the wind like it is now. Now, this is not a native holly. This is an English holly, and I can only tell because the top of the tree is by my bedroom window, and I can see that the leaves at the top have smooth margins. So I'm like, oh, that's not a native holly. That's not a Ilex opaca. That's the English one. But a few years ago, many hollies suffered when the high wind came along. It seems to be like it was towards the end of the summer and into the fall and winter. This tree dropped all its leaves. It just wasn't prepared. And while hollies make a great screen, especially the English hollies, they're not particularly adapted to the wind. And this tree is between my neighbor's house and my house. And it is a beautiful screen. I don't have to see their house. They don't have to see my house. It's their tree. but the wind is prevailing towards my house. So the prevailing wind is west to east. It has taken down the finish on the paint on the side of my house. I get everybody's unsecured recycling in my yard because that's the way the wind blows. This tree dropped all its leaves. And I was really kind of upset. It's a beautiful tree. Then she didn't cut it down, fortunately. This tree, now this is a recent picture, came back with such vigor. It took it 2 seasons, but the response to, or its survival mode, it dropped its leaves, but little by little, it built up and built up. The tree is fuller. The leaves have gotten a little glossier, and with the high winds that have been since that first leaf drop event, the tree has never dropped leaves again. It kind of figured out its survival mode, and it got, it got stronger, and it provides the screen that it was meant to. But if the neighbor had panicked and cut the tree down because it looked dead, she would have lost this tree. So while it's not a native tree and it's not particularly adapted to our high wind conditions, the tree did recover. Every living thing's instinct is to survive, and it figured out a way to adapt, and it does well. So just like the ferns that dried out in the drought, the way a plant reacts to stress may look to us as if the plant has failed, but it's actually learning, it's adapting, it's figuring out what it needs to do. And in this case, there was no way for me to intervene unless I wrapped it in burlaps, not my tree, not very attractive. But I invite you guys to come on in next March talk, next lecture series talk in March is Kathy Ludden from the Greenberg Nature Center. And she's going to give you a talk on shrubs, and she is the shrub queen and knows about, how shrubs interact in our environment. So I invite you to come along and listen to her talk in March on shrubs and trees and the best ones to plant for tough areas. Now we also are dealing with invasive pest pressure, right? This was the emerald birch borer. So we lost trees. The pest resilience that's tougher one for us to fight. Now it's spotted lanternfly. I know that Cornell is making strides against eradicating emerald birch borer, but what there are things we can do to minimize pest encroachment on our landscapes, because some of these warmer winters are creating a perfect storm for pests. Invasives, non-native insects can now survive a winter here, and they are just coming out by the thousands every spring. So one of the things we can do is do not overmulch. Pests can hide in big damp piles of mulch. And source your mulch from, I say, local nurseries. I had mulch brought in once from I don't know where, but it was put all over my yard. And for 2 or 3 seasons straight, I was fighting porcelain berry and bittersweet. So try to get it from your local nurseries, people you deal with regularly. Always prune dead, dying, or diseased shrubs. Figure out when the actual pruning seasons are for those shrubs. Not everything gets pruned at the same time, but do your homework to figure out when to prune. And because pests look for weak points of entry, so any cut is an invitation. So make sure you make your cuts and your prunes at the right time of year, and keep the plant, all the dead things off your plant as much as you can. Here's one that was a big lesson for me. Avoid monocultures. Avoid planting a row of shrubs that are all the same. Mix up your borders. If you lose one shrub to a disease or an infestation, you won't lose the whole border. I planted, before I knew of the importance of native plants, I planted a row of 30 Leland cypress. I had done my homework. They had a great disease resistance until the weather started trending warmer, which is doing at an accelerating pace. And all of a sudden, now there's a waterborne illness. It's taking out half these shrubs. So lesson learned, I've taken them out one by one as they fail, but I've underplanted with rhododendron and viburnum to fill in the gaps and to try to keep that screen, that hedge still there without having to rip out a whole row of shrubs that or these are huge trees now that honestly I can't afford to do. And I still like the hedge. It's just not doing well. And it's because they're all dying from the same thing in succession. It's just like a domino effect. So avoid monocultures and mix up your border. It's easier to replace one plant than 30. So now we've done all of this homework and we're looking and all of our native plants have arrived. This is an investment. Everything's come in, your trees, your shrubs, you have great perennials that have all been brought in. You've got all the plans laid out for where these things are going to go. There are shrubs, there are grasses. Everything is going to go in this beautiful pattern. Who will survive? All of these were sourced from a reputable place. Now it's time to figure out who will survive. So let's talk now about plant adaptability. So while we talk about extreme weather patterns, climate change is a complicated topic that's best left to the professionals. However, it's beneficial to touch on the topic because that leading to the adaptability in one-off conditions will lead to the long-term longevity of the plants and the landscapes we love. As our zone becomes warmer, we wonder what plants can we continue to add to our landscapes. Excuse me. So we're going to talk about considering the range of the zone for the plant you're interested in. We're talking about native plants. So we know that they are supposed to be adaptable and healthy in our zone, but oftentimes a plant zone is huge. So we're going to talk a little bit about ecotype, ecoregions, and cultivars. So there are different definitions of ecotype, but the main one that we're going to look at today, and different definitions, meaning some of them are easier to understand and less easy to understand, but AI generated a definition for me. Wikipedia has a definition for everything, but I'm going to go with the USDA definition of an ecotype. So it is an individual species having a large geographical, that has a large geographical distribution that may affect its different growing habits in different areas of that distribution. So when we talk about ecotypes and knowing your plant's ecotype, we'll consider this, I'm going to use the dogwood as my example here. You should know where your plant has been grown. That's all I'm boiling down to here, is know where your plant was grown. You might use a local nursery, but the nursery might have bought the plant from Florida. And that is that is a plant that is an ecotype that is different. Although it's the same species, its growing conditions, its phenology, all of that is going to be different than a plant that you source that was grown in, say, Pennsylvania or Connecticut. My good friend down in Western South Carolina, a tiny little place called Abbeville, in the western corner of South Carolina, has a pink dogwood that I love because I had, until recently, a pink dogwood on the back corner of my house, and in the house she bought, she had a pink dogwood on the front corner of her house. And I thought, wow, isn't that great? But I noticed when I get down to visit her in maybe March, April area, her pink dogwood is already blooming. The phenology of the plant is different, although it is the same species. The ecotype of her plant is different, although it is the same species. So plants that are in our area and have been grown locally, they bloom when the pollinator that needs them is coming. The pollinators and the plants in the same ecotype or ecoregion, they have evolved together. They've co-evolved to know how to depend on each other. Hummingbirds come back right around the time your wild columbine is blooming. They're coming back. They know that this is a food source, and the wild columbine blooms at the time that the hummingbirds return. as it is with many of the plants, are red maples, the Acer rubrum, our native red maples. Part of their phenology is to bloom when the earliest blooming thing in our region is the red maple, and the pollinators know that that beautiful tree is a source of food. So knowing where your plant was grown is important to its long-term adaptability in the conditions that are in your yard. Now, cultivars, that might be a term we may be more familiar with. And this is a very controversial subject in the world of horticulture. There are plants, obviously, that are bred for certain traits. So if you think of our native red bud, Cercis canadensis, there's a cultivar for those people who love burgundy leaves on their trees. So Cercis was bred in a cultivar called forest pansy to give red leaves. We understand that cultivars come from the desire to either get rid of a weakness or to create a certain trait, a prettier flower, a better bloom time. That's what, most cultivars we're familiar with. But for the purposes of this talk, we want to know what plants are cultivated for maybe disease resistance, size. Perhaps there's a smaller version of a shrub we love, and we can't fit the bigger version, the straight species in our yard. So we look for cultivars for size. But do understand that while we're still doing research on this, some of the traits that we breed for, like the red leaves on Cercis canadensis forest pansy, some of those traits are not as beneficial to pollinators. Studies have shown that pollinators are not as fond of the red-leafed cultivars as they are of the straight species. And that is ongoing research. The Native Plant Center it does research also on what is being called nativars, the cultivars of native plants. I've had experience where some of these cultivars are prettier versions of plants don't do as well in my yard. They don't last as long. The pollinators don't visit them. So when you're researching cultivars, do a little homework, and if you can, if the information is available. And these are all emerging topics. So sometimes there is a dearth of information. We can't quite find the answers. That's where the citizen scientists come in. Observe, ask questions, bring it up at your garden club meeting. Who has success with this or that? But cultivars can be great if you get one that really works well and is still beneficial to the environment, but they also can not work so well. But it's worth mentioning when we talk about finding adaptable plants and toughness. So we talk about ecotype and sourcing, where you source your plant to build adaptability and capability. Genetic diversity is also important and sometimes harder to know. A plant that is open pollinated or grown from seed is tougher and has better genetic diversity than a clone plant, which is often the case with cultivars. So when you can, it's always great to ask your grower and have your grower know where the plant is sourced from, whether it's a clonal plant, from grown from a clone. So, and when you can, and I've had fun doing this, but it's not always easy or practical, sow your perennials from seed when you can. And have real fun with it. Buy seed packs from different companies and just try starting your plants from seed. There are certain ways that the genetic diversity also helps our pollinators. Bees, the more diverse the pollen that both specialist and generalist bees collect, the better chance of survival for their offspring. Pollen is their food. That's how they get their protein. When the protein is healthy and there's a diversity of it in their diet, then they do better then their hives are healthier. So it's more than what meets the eye sometimes when we talk about knowing your ecotype and genetic diversity. There's a whole community, as we talked about at the beginning, there's a whole community depending on what plants we put in. So genetic diversity, I want to just make sure it adds to overall biodiversity, and biodiversity increases the capacity for adaptability by increasing the health and stability of your landscape community. Now we're going to touch on this, just ecoregions. We talk about ecotypes. What are the parameters for an ecotype? What's local? So ecoregions kind of denote areas with similar ecosystems, the same type, quality, and quantity of environmental resources. So the region that has similar soil, similar rainfall, all of those things are divided up by both the EPA and some of these definitions are coming from the National Wildlife Federation. But there are the world is divided into ecoregions. On a broader stroke, there are like maybe 18 worldwide, and then that's level 1, then level 2 might get you to 115. And then when you go to level 3, there are like 100, almost 200 ecoregions. So this whole northeastern corridor is known as the Eastern Temperate Forest. But when you get down to level 3, which is our ecoregion 59, is northern coastal zone, that's the focus of really the plants that will do well in that strip that runs from, I think, a little bit of up to New England down to just about the tip of New Jersey. And that's our ecoregion, region 59. So growers may not know that. It's just an interesting concept when we talk about what does locally sourced mean. Can we get it local? Is Washington, D.C., is Virginia still local? Is Maine local? Knowing the ecoregion that you're in does help with figuring out what's locally sourced. What does locally sourced plant mean? Okay, so now we've amended, we've prepped, we're ready to source and to sow. So we talk about what plants are the best. And I'm going to go back 1 second to show you why native plants, some of the qualities of a native plant that make it a better choice. So we're looking at roots here, and many of you have seen this slide before. I think it comes up in almost every native plant talk. It's a great slide because it shows the root mass, and root mass, as we talked about, builds soil health beneath the surface. If you look at the roots of daylilies, and I love daylilies, they're great, but look, if they go out long and wide, or wide, they're broader rooted. Look at the Echinacea purpurea, or the purple coneflower. Look at this nice long root. Imagine a field of those or a swath of those with those long roots, how they benefit the soil. Some of our prairie grasses, the roots are super long. They are really good for water remediation. These plants are made to soak up water in the Northeast because we do typically we're in a drought now, but typically this is a high rainfall part of the country. We're blessed with copious amounts of rain in most years. So it makes sense that the plants that are native to here would have adaptations that will support all of that water and rainfall. So when we bring in non-natives with smaller roots, they may do well somewhere else in shallow rooted areas. One of the prettiest things I saw that really illustrated adaptability to me, natural adaptability, when I was hiking through Bryce Canyon. Bryce is Utah, I think, not Arizona. I think Bryce is Utah. But anyway, I'm hiking through, and just as I'm going through one of those rock formations, the hoodoos, a tiny, tiny rock columbine was growing out of a crevice. It looked exactly like the columbine that's in my yard, the same spur, almost the flower size was almost the same, but the actual leaves were tiny and the plant was growing in what to my eye looked like zero soil. So this plant had adapted smaller leaves because there's less rain, tinier root system because there's not a lot of soil, and it had adapted to that growing condition. If I wanted to grow that tiny little rock columbine, I'd have to reconstruct a rock garden in order for it to survive, and there's still no guarantee that it would. So here in the Northeast, plants have long roots. It's because we get so much water. Diversity builds resilience. In your garden, variety is really the spice of life. It adds resilience to the soil. It adds resilience to your plants. We talk about avoiding monocultures. especially when it comes to trees and shrubs. Variety benefits the pollinators, and open pollinator plants are genetically stronger. So you can add variety to the, also when it comes to the ages or the maturity of the plants that you plant. When you plant something that's an older thing, because you need a statement right away. You don't want to plant a small tree and you're not even, sometimes I've planted a small tree and I'm not even probably going to live to see the thing get full grown. But uh, planting a smaller tree sometimes ensures, or a smaller shrub, first of all, it's easier to plant in this rocky soil, but it also ensures the layers of longevity for your garden. So planting younger shrubs mixed with older statement shrubs is cost effective. It's actually adds life and length to your garden, and it's a way to just ensure that your garden goes on for a long time. It really just, and it adds layers of interest. Bigger shrubs with smaller shrubs, it's a good thing. So you can add planting younger shrubs with older shrubs, maybe doing some small seedlings along with more established plantings. Adds variety. And again, the root system, as the root systems grow in these plants, they actually add diversity, biodiversity beneath the soil. If you have property, here are some big trees that I love. So here we have river birch. This is a great alternative, and I use this with a tree that was between my neighbor's house and mine, sort of a hell strip planting between two driveways. They had a white birch there, and it was their tree, and the tree was failing, but it seemed to be failing in my driveway. So eventually I approached the neighbor and asked, would she like to share a tree? And I told her, if you take out this white birch that's pretty much dead, I'll plant a river birch. I guarantee you'll love it. Of course, it's got a different color to the bark, but the bark is interesting and beautiful. It's a native, it's a little more resistant. And, you know, she had young kids at the time. So I said, her name will be Betty, for Betula nigra. And it's a fast grower. You'll hardly miss your white birch in a couple of seasons. This thing will get big. Now, it is a hell strip planting. It's close to the road. But it also is a fast grower, so you do need space for it. But it also is put up with the salt, and river birches are, you know, their name. They do like it wet, but it is put up with droughts. It's put up with road salt, and it's been a fast grower, and it tames easily. This tree, I've cleared off the bottom limbs of it to keep the canopy high, because it is at the foot of the driveway and we want to be able to see traffic. And it doesn't mind. It's actually very obedient. It's a tall tree and it's a big tree, but I find the bark is beautiful and the tree is a lovely alternative when your white birches have failed you. It's a fast growing tree, but you need room for it. Obviously, we talked a little bit about Acer rubrum, red maple. You need space for it. This is not a next to your house tree. It's a big tree, but I put it in here to talk again about ecotypes. This tree has a huge range from Florida to probably as far north as Canada. But if you're sourcing this tree, you're not going to source the Florida one. You're going to source one that's been grown closer to your ecoregion that will be your ecotype. It's got a huge range. We loved sugar maples, but sugar maples are already disappearing from our landscape because the range is way further north, and they're not going to do well for very much longer in our changing climates. Junipers, I love them. And what I love, I've tried the taller junipers that my yard doesn't get quite enough sun for, but creeping junipers, great ground cover, tough little plant, beautiful berries. It's a great plant. As I said, stick around for the March talk, and I'm sure you'll hear from Kathy on some of her shrub ideas. It's really a great plant, and it's got a lot of variation, and there are some diseases that affect it, but it is also, there are also cultivars that have been bred for disease resistance. And I can't say enough about oaks. I mean, I don't want to go Doug Tallamy on it. So we've heard oaks, keystone plants. There are many, many varieties. They are great pollinators, supporters. And I have one of my gardens, I have a smaller variety shrub oaks. I don't know how well they'll do here in New York, but there are different varieties, and the fall color, they're just beautiful. So small trees, I took down a Norway maple to put in Cercis canadensis. I just love it. Now, Cercis is not necessarily a long-lived tree, and you can kind of tell that it's not a long-lived tree because it sends out volunteers and saplings everywhere. The shorter the life, the more usually the more abundant the seed drop. So it can be to some a weed tree. I love it because you can't beat that spring color in a dull landscape. That color is just, you can't beat it, and it's long blooming. Amelanchier canadensis, that's a great understory tree, a small tree, does well in forest or woody conditions. I have observed that that tree does need, in my experience with it, a little amending and prepping before it goes in. It is a woodland tree, so dropping it into an unprepared soil, um, it's not going to do well. I have one that I took it out of its ecoregion and I tried planting it and I just dropped it in the soil and it's been struggling with 3 leaves for about 5 years now. So I always suggest with especially plants that are woodland plants to prep. Where are we with time? Okay, so crabapple, beautiful tree. I love it. Mine was so old it finally gave up the ghost. But what I loved about crab apples is that I would get a flock of overwintering robins that would come and hang out in this crabapple tree all for like a week in the beginning of January. And it's a beautiful tree. So I have replaced it. The tree that I had while it was old, it was beautiful, but it got some sort of a leaf spot disease. So I am trying out a disease-resistant cultivar that is supposed to still be pollinator friendly. So we'll see how it goes. Cornus Florida, as I talked about, the pink dogwood, another tough tree that my Cornus dogwood died of old age and I was getting some structural work done, so the roots were damaged. But that tree took a hit from a falling white pine in my yard and it lived, it flowered. It's a beautiful tree. The bark is beautiful. The sculpture of the tree is beautiful. It's smaller, but for me, it was a tough tree. It put up with drought, flood. It was in a very wet spot. And even when it was dry, it did well. It survived being fallen on by a white pine tree. It just finally had to be moved because of some work that I needed done in the yard. Shrubs, I love shrubs. Shrubs are the club chairs of the yard. Small, they add a little punch and a little zing. They're great for they're comfortable for birds that need nesting sites. Who doesn't love a good chair? So I think that wherever you can punch up a spot, add shrubs. When I do a container talk, I always say containers are to your yard what throw pillows are to your living room. I think shrubs are like the small little club chairs that actually add something to your living space. Now, I love hydrangeas, and yes, I said that out loud. I will admit it. The ones that I have in my yard, I do have the natives and I have some of the ornamental exotics, but I will give a good shout out to the hydrangea arborescens. Haas Halo is the cultivar. This thing, the bees go crazy for, and it's not nearly the drama queen that the mopheads are. It doesn't fall over when it's dry. It will flop if it's overly wet, which is kind of the opposite. But this girl put up with the drought, it put up with the heavy rains, and it is constantly covered in bumblebees and all sorts of bees. I love it. Another favorite of mine is Clethra alnifolia. That is a big shrub, though. So one of my favorites of that is Ruby Spice. It's the cultivar, and it gets this white flower, gets a little pinkish red on it, and it has a great spicy scent to it. And it doesn't get as big as the straight species, but pollinators still like it. This is a summer blooming shrub, and it blooms for a long time. I love this one. Now, because I wanted to add more of them, I just added some of the cultivar. I think it's hummingbird. I think that's the name of the cultivar. It's much smaller, I'm trying it out to see how it reacts with pollinators, how long-lived it is. I'll let you know how it goes. Another tough one is this one. And I was on the fence about including Merica or bayberry. It is a great tough shrub, but it's also in a hell strip planting. So it's getting road salt and it's getting snow piled on it. I love the smell of it. The issue I have with it is that it's aggressive and it suckers. And so I put it in a spot I didn't want it to do that in. So another gardener learning lesson. It's a tough plant if you have a space that you need a screen or you can let it run in a back corner of a yard. There's your girl, but she does take up a lot of space. Um, Blueberry. I love it. This is a great plant for fall color, for pollinator benefit. For you too, if you can get a blueberry from it before the birds do. But it also will need some support during drought. Blueberries do like moisture. So if you're hitting a drought season, keep an eye on your blueberry and make sure you give it enough water. Perennials, annuals. Here are some of my favorites. In this garden here, this is Agastache. This is the straight species, Funiculum, if I'm saying it right, Agastache funiculum. There is a cultivar, Blue Fortune, that I also have. It's beautiful. It's so far been lasting a long time. It just doesn't spread and fill in the way the straight species does. And I love the straight species of Agastache because it sows everywhere. And it's even shown up in flower pots with the annuals that were in the flower pots. So I left it in there and it actually looks great. It holds a great fall structure like a candelabra. I do love this plant and I love the way the bees react to it. The straight species of Echinacea purpurea, great pollinator plant and spreads and does not seem to mind whatever condition. Once it's established, it just goes and it doesn't seem to it doesn't seem to be stressed out by much. Under here, now this is one that I had to learn. This is a Rudbeckia, obviously, this yellow. Rudbeckia hirta is a short-lived perennial. So when you notice a plant disappear, figure out which plant you planted. It may not be a failure of the plant. The plant might have just completed its life cycle. This is Rudbeckia. Oops, sorry, where did I go? All right. This one is Rudbeckia fulgida. They look similar, but this is a longer lived perennial. So I've planted hirta before and wondered why it failed, thought it didn't like my yard. It does set seed and some of the seeds came back, but the actual mother plants didn't, and it left holes. So I thought it was a plant failure. Maybe it was too hot, maybe it was too cold. No, the life cycle of the plant was only 2 years and I didn't know the difference between the two. So also keep that in mind when you're talking about tough plants and adaptable plants. Make sure you know the characteristics, the phenology, when it blooms, how long it blooms, what its life cycle is, before you assume that the plant died. And it may show up again if it's waiting for favorable conditions and there are seeds in the ground. It could come back, but it may create a hole in the interim. This is Oenothera, the evening primrose. Can't kill it. It comes up everywhere. It might even be a little bit of a pain, but it's easy to manage. It pulls right out, and it's a great early season color. Really love this one. It's just a happy color. This is an annual, but it's one that sows so freely all around the yard, and it's borne on these wiry, tall stems. It's Verbena bonarensis. Pollinators go crazy for it. And you can always grab a handful of the fuzzy seeds and put it somewhere if you want it to just spread. I planted it once in my yard probably 15 years ago, and it still pops up in the most unexpected places. It's a happy little plant that kind of sits on these wiry stems and kind of moves in the wind above all your other mass plantings. It's a nice addition and very tough. But it is an annual. So if you deadhead it, or cut it back, you may not get another one next year. It does need to sow. So I love grasses. I have a weakness for grasses. They just make me very happy. But I want, and people are going crazy for grasses now, and everybody wants to plant, meadows, and meadows are a great alternative to lawn. They are better for the environment. They are pollinator, just habitat, wonderful. But I will say they are not no maintenance. You do not put in a meadow and then go to Europe for 3 years. The prairie ecosystems are extremely resilient, but they do require planning. Meadow seed mixes are careful balances of wildflowers, annuals, perennials, and grasses. And weeds have to be monitored. A lot of weed pressure in the beginning of a meadow, you have to monitor. And most of all, mowing is key. So you may recognize this is 684. A garden club member and myself went to the DOT and asked if we could put in a meadow planting. Here, if we supplied the seed, would they put a meadow in? Because it's just an ugly strip of grass. And they said, sure. This was the result of it. You can see all of the beautiful wildflowers that came in, and they mow it every October. It looks great. It really was a treat to see. I've gotten people who've driven by and told me they saw it, and it's lovely, but it is maintained and it is mowed. So keep in mind, this is the Northeast, not the Midwest. A meadow wants to be a forest when it grows up. So you do have to monitor, mow, and make sure you put in the right seed mix. You can't just say, oh, I'm just going to stop mowing my grass and see what comes. This was my meadow attempt. This is the edge of a golf course where it comes off of a rough, and the plants at the top of this hill were very grassy and they had a nice look to them. So I cut back on the mowing. And as it turned out, so did the landscaper who I asked to mow this thing. So now you can see this was what it looked like at first. It does have a very beautiful meadowy look. You can see where the lawn mowing stopped. Well, a few years later, besides the deer, now the white pines are coming. The ferns have gotten taller. There are other little shrubby woodland things, the primary growth of an early forest are coming in. I don't mind it because this particular property is surrounded by woods, so I really don't mind the encroachment of the woods closer to the house. But I thought it was kind of funny in my thought that I was just going to let this area that already had quite a few naturally occurring natives that come into it. It has a lot of the different types of solidago. It's a beachy, dry, sandy area. So I thought that, some of these, the beach things would come in, but I'm getting more beachland shrubs than I am getting a prairie meadow look. So just keep that in mind. Meadows are a great alternative to lawn, but they are not no maintenance. I've included this link if you can screenshot it, because the list of plants by our ecoregion is huge. And rather than try to retype it all, this link here that you're seeing is a list of plants by ecoregion provided by the National Wildlife Foundation. So I'll let that sit there for a second if anyone wants to either take a picture of it. Okay, so in summation here, even adaptable plants need help sometimes. This was that scorched earth native fern, ostrich fern patch. It recovered. It did recover, but it took a little bit of time. And so fortunately, I didn't cut it all back. I just let it survive. And that's all it was trying to do. It went into, and many plants have this feature. If you notice, I have different rhododendrons around the yard. The rhododendron leaves sometimes look like they're dying, but in a condition or a survival mode thing, thermoplasty, the rhododendron leaves will curl when it's drought. That's how they conserve water. They'll flatten out in the winter and kind of droop, and that's how they get more sunlight during dark days. Plants will tell you what they're doing in order to survive. But when we can jump in and do something to help them out, like giving water when they need more water, amending and prepping soil, managing invasives, pruning, this leads to the adaptability of plants in our landscape under these tough conditions. So like we're looking outside today, weather changes quickly. But climate change is slower change over time, supporting the flora and the fauna as they struggle to adapt, just as we struggle to adapt, may help them find and survive the long-term trends. But adaptability requires plants that can survive and gardeners who are flexible to the needs of those plants facing these new and changing environmental pressures. So, thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Jacqui. So since it is almost 11 o'clock, I will say thank you to everyone who has stayed for this presentation. We had a fantastic turnout. And just a reminder, if you haven't already, feel free to sign up for the March 5th program about Florida native shrubs with Kathy Ludden. But for now, we have some questions. So if you have any questions, please feel free to put them into either the chat or the Q&A, and we'll be monitoring them. If you can stay and listen to some of the questions answered, happy to have you. So there was one question, actually there's one question about some of your slides. Jacqui, can you, on the slides that you have small trees and big trees, can you just go over what trees they are on them?
Yes, I'll go back to that slide. Okay, so for the big trees here, and the list is here on the side, this is Acer rubrum. This is our red maple. This one is Betula nigra. This is our river birch. This is juniper. Now I have juniper in a large tree slide, but it actually comes in all different sizes. And I just, it can be creeping juniper or it can be a larger juniper. And this is an oak tree. This is Quercus. And I don't know exactly which oak it is. It was one that I thought was really pretty that was blooming towards the back of my yard. And the next slide is, this is Cercis canadensis. This is Eastern redbud. This picture you may recognize was taken down at New York Botanical. This, I believe, in the background is a crabapple. In the foreground, this may be a dogwood that may just be opening up, but more likely it may be a magnolia in this field. Here in the corner, you can kind of see a creeping juniper that's kind of growing low across the ground. And in this spot, this is another favorite of mine. This is a weeping hemlock. It is harder to find, but it also is more resistant to woolly adelgid. But I took this particular picture because this landscape, this tree was just singing, and I just wanted to get a picture of that. So Cercis canadensis, malice or crabapple, and this one might be a magnolia, but I was hoping to capture a picture of a dogwood.
We have a couple of questions about appreciation and love for the clefra, and someone had asked, is it the common name sweet pepper bush? Which yes, it is. So you might see it referred to as a sweet pepper bush. Then there was another question about woolly adelgid on viburnums, and we answered that one. So woolly adelgids, yeah, so they're not found on viburnum. They're found on hemlocks. So the woolly hemlock adelgid, or they might be seeing woolly aphids, which are just a nuisance pest, nothing too horrible to get rid of.
I had the row that I talk about voiding a monoculture. I just repeated the same problem that I had when I took out a row of hemlock that had been completely destroyed by woolly adelgid. I put in a row of Leland cypress, which now was dying from another disease. So I clearly didn't learn. And now, as I've added viburnum and rhododendrons to underplant it, but it's really, hemlock's unfortunately so beautiful, but everyone I pass in my neighborhood has woolly adelgid. So, but I did learn, because I was like watching this plant so carefully, the weeping hemlock, or Suga pendulum, is that the weeping hemlock? It is more resistant to woolly adelgid.
And so there's another question, quite long. I think we can do this one together, Jackie.
Okay.
So this person says that they have a client that has failing boxwoods, and they were recommending landscape architect recommended Weigelia to replace them, and they were talking about should they test soil, plant something else, assume that nothing's going to grow there. You know, what's the best way to deal with that? And for that, I know I agree, and Jackie, you love soil too. A soil test would be great to
Yeah.
see if it's within the range of what it needs to be to grow. We can also, so I guess I'll plug CCUS Chester here if you don't mind. You can send us an email, and actually, I think this person did send us an email. So, you know, happy to look at some pictures, have a soil test done, kind of try to figure out what's going on in the area to see what could be possibly causing the problem.
So they're replacing a boxwood with a Weigela. Is that how it
Yes,
started out?
yes. But
Yeah,
it's also failing.
the Weigela is.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah, probably needs soil amendment and go again. I'm going to put a plug in because I know Kathy is really a shrub person to come to the March CCE lecture. But I would try. I would also try a native, a tougher shrub. The soil very well could be contaminated with something, but I would try something. I have Weigela. I love them, but they can get leggy and they get big fast. So there are other shrubs that might do better and maybe less susceptible. But to Hillary's point, definitely check the soil first before you continue to plant in that area. You may want to do a remedial planting of maybe a perennial or something, a tall perennial like what's a good one just to fill the space. Well, I mean, people might find that hideous, but I love Joe Pye weed, maybe Little Joe, that would take up the space while you figure out what's in the soil and you don't have to worry about killing a shrub. You just have, or another great shrubby perennial might be Amsonia or Baptisia. It'll take up the space, but it dies back in the winter. So you won't be killing a shrub, but it will give you that shrub-like appearance and the soil may get a chance to recover before you put another shrub there. And I love
Yeah.
Amsonia threadleaf because it gets the most wonderful fall color. Way better than
Yeah.
Nigella.
Yeah. And just also, if you're going to put anything down in the soil, like a fertilizer or anything for that nature, definitely getting a soil test done first to make sure that it's needed is the best way to go about doing it to both save your time, you know, money if it's not even needed, or maybe you don't have a problem with soil, or you do, but knowing before you put anything down is definitely helpful. And unfortunately, a lot of the diseases that might be present, or if you're worried about something like that, it's not going to be something that you can test the soil for. It would be more something that you test plant material for. So just keep in mind if anyone on the call or you know has a problem with a disease or what they think is a disease in a plant, you can always send us pictures and we can help out with that. You can have a sample brought into our lab. But looking at soil to try to figure out the plant disease is not something that happens most of the time, depending on what it is. All right, we have a couple more questions. We have a lot of thank yous. A lot of this was wonderful.
Good. It's hard to tell on Zoom. I can't see anybody, so I'm kind of like, oh, is anybody there?
We have with native rhododendrons. Oh, which native rhododendrons did you plant under the Leland cypress?
Maxima, I believe Rose Bay rhododendron, great Rose Bay. And I planted that in other places. I also noticed the leaves don't do as much of the curling on that native one. But the curling is not a sign of the plant's failing. It's more of its reaction to stress. Nobody looks good under stress, not a person, not a plant. So, but the I think it's maximum rhododendron maximum. That's the big one that gets nice big trusses.